Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel and thanks for logging on. I just happen to have two tourbillon watches and we're going to do a comparison. Which one will I choose for myself? Follow along and decide your favorite. Today we're discussing on the left the year 2000 Lange Sohne Lange Tourbillon, a limited edition of 250 pieces, and off to its left, your right, the Omega Central Tourbillon. This is the caliber 2600B variant that was made from 2002 to 2006. Let's start with the older of the two. Lange has had a tourbillon in its catalog since the very beginning. The Tourbillon pour le Mérite was part of the Charter 4 in 1994, but the Lange 1, arguably the design icon of the manufacturer, didn't get its own tourbillon variant until Y2K. It was worth the wait. The watch that you see right here is rose gold, 38.5 millimeters, and remarkably slim at 9.9 millimeters thick. Lug to lug, it's 46.8, and I'm going to throw it on my wrist. It's an easy watch to wear on a 16 centimeter circumference wrist. It's compact. It can be worn on a smaller wrist than mine, probably as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. It gives you all the action up front: hours, minutes, seconds, power reserve, the oversized date, and the classic look of a Lange 1. So it manages to be both Lange 1 and tourbillon without compromising either. The timepiece does have a sensational tourbillon carriage, and I'm doing my best to get close here. But the first thing you note about its tourbillon, aside from the fact that its half bridge is entirely black polished, but the first thing you note is that it has a diamond capstone. It actually has two diamond end stones on the staff that bears the tourbillon carriage. Yep, the case back is a dream. We'll get to it in a moment. Now you keep most of the functionality, indeed pretty much all of the functionality of a standard Lange 1. The only real change is the displacement of the small seconds to within the hours and minutes register. All applique rose gold, quarter Romans and indices, rose gold frame for the date, and a power reserve indicator spanning 3 days of autonomy. It is a manual wind watch, and you can really get a good sense of the tourbillon carriage with its black polished cage in a filigree style, its black polished and skeletonized half bridge, and of course that gorgeous cut gem on top. There is an overcoil hairspring, though you can't quite see it, and this is a 1-minute tourbillon beaten away at 21,006. Turn it all over, now you can see the other business end of Lange manual wind caliber L961. This is the 9611 before it had hacking seconds, but trust me, you won't miss it. It's gorgeous. 3/4 style bridge, jewels for the train and the barrels set in chaton. 3/4 style in homage to the pocket watch era, German silver, nickel, copper, zinc, golden bridge and plate material to offer a corresponding tribute to the Saxon pocket watches. Blued screws, also black polished screws, you can see them, and of course twin hand engraved half bridges. Rather than giving you just a half bridge underneath the tourbillon, the half bridge bearing the fourth wheel in a spectacular spiral fashion, also hand engraved, so no two are exactly alike. Perlage engine turning on the base plate, once more manual wind, 3-day power reserve, 49 jewels adjusted in 5 positions like a chronometer. If you were to take the plunge and throw this on your wrist, you would not regret. But just as Lange in 1994 sprung into the world with its first ever tourbillon, so did Omega. Actually, an anniversary watch for the Omega brand, the 1994 Central Tourbillon was a breakthrough designed by watchmaker Maurice Grimm more than anyone else. It features a number of functional elements that are fairly similar to his Tourbillon Automatique for Audemars Piguet, which includes a setting crown on the case back and a winding crown that does not pull out at 3 o'clock. The case is Baroque compared to the simple lines of the Lange, which saves its only flourish in the form of a stepped set of lugs. This is designed by the vintage 2637 reference, all in white gold. The size of this case, 38.7 millimeters in diameter, is almost identical to the Lange, and I'm actually going to show you how it looks on the wrist. I showed you the Lange. Now we're going to take a look at the DeVille. The DeVille is automatic, a little bit thicker, but not thick. 13.3 millimeters thick. Lug to lug, it's a very manageable 49, but it is significantly over 2 millimeters larger lug to lug. So I would say 14 centimeters circumference is the smallest wrist for this watch. The spacing between the lugs is 19 millimeters. It's 20 on the Lange. It has a much more expressive case, and these overriding fluted portions of the lugs actually seem to act like a set of pincers holding the bezel. It's almost as though the lugs are the frame of a ring and the case and the bezel are a gem set in the middle. You'll also note that the bezel has a flat outer plane and some aesthetic gymnastics are performed to make the bezel look narrower than it is. There's that domed profile inboard and the flat plane outboard, and that's because if you get close enough to this dial, you'll note that, and we're going to raise the setting crown on the case back. Accutron fans, caliber 214, you're going to recognize this. Audemars Piguet Tourbillon Automatique fans, or caliber 2870 fans, you'll recognize this system. There's a case-back setting system and two sapphires that move about the center of the dial. They're not driven from the center of the dial. If you note the overhang underneath the bezel, there's actually a pinion outboard that drives both the hour hand and the minute hand. So what you're actually looking at is two superimposed sapphires with metallized deposits forming the hands. There's a radial undulating rose lathe guilloche, and then inboard, we're going to get super close here. You can see that the tourbillon assembly itself is finished as well as anything from Lange. There's mirrored chamfering. There is a set of divots outboard in a white gold hand-finished chaptering that acts as the seconds subdial for the watch. The tourbillon is a 1-minute tourbillon, and you'll note the fired blued index fine adjustment regulator for the tourbillon itself. The index forms the seconds hand, and there's a small scale that can be used. It can be moved back and forth to speed up or slow down the tourbillon. There's also a conventional set of timing pins. You'll also note an overcoil hairspring blue oxidized to help the tourbillon compound its advantages with respect to gravity, keeping superb time. This generation caliber 2600B of the Omega Central Tourbillon was the first to feature COSC chronometer certification, made from 2002 to 2006 before the next generation. It is a 45-hour power reserve automatic winder with a platinum mass and 48 joules. It is extensively hand-finished, though the only components you can see are the tourbillon carriage and adjacent structures. There's also a sort of sunburst rusticated hand-finished plinth underneath that recalls the Montre de Sable series by Dominique Loiseau that inspired the Omega tourbillons. That's where the inception of the project was located. His custom pocket watches for Baselworld used a very similar aesthetic motif to what you'll see underneath this tourbillon carriage. So 1-minute tourbillon beaten away at 3 Hz, 21,600 vibrations per hour. It's a loud tourbillon. You can hear it inside a quiet room. All of this 30 meters water resistant, exactly like the Lange. It is not an aquatic watch. Remember, you set with the case back crown, you wind with the conventional crown, and you wind it in a counterclockwise direction. So let's talk about the advantages of one over the other. Obviously, if your wrist is smaller, you're going to want the Lange. It's slimmer by a considerable margin at 9.9 versus 13.3, and it's important to remember that the Lange also over 2 millimeters narrower lug-to-lug across the wrist. You're also going to note that on the Lange, you get more functionality. You have a power reserve to warn you of when the watch might run down. You have a date and a large, easily read date. You also have a watch that perhaps gives you more from a finishing standpoint. Not only is it beautifully executed, the tourbillon bridge, the structures, all adjacent components and mechanisms, but you turn it over and you can appreciate everything else, not just because there's no winding rotor, but because there is a display caseback, and what's there is sensational. Bring a loop, as they say. With 250 pieces made, I don't want to call it less common than the Omega, but the Omega has been made in several generations, just as the Lange 1 tourbillon has been made in several generations, but this was the first, and this was the original Lange 1 tourbillon, so it does have that intangible going for it. I'm not going to count rose gold or white gold in favor or against either piece. It's a matter of preference. Both watches have been available in colored gold as well as white metals. Now, jumping over to the Omega doesn't have the 72-hour power reserve of the Lange, but it does have automatic winding for everyday convenience. Now, the timepiece might be more legible. I would say at the margins, the contrast with the dial here is higher. It's also perhaps a little bit more conventional, as you have center seconds as well as center hours and center minutes, and it has the quality of exotica about it that perhaps the Lange doesn't have. As a tourbillon handmade in a quantity of a few dozens per year, this is the weirdo. This is the watch for which Breitling and Rolex have no equivalent. A tourbillon handmade inside the Omega Labyrinth, that makes it special. The case, whether you like it or loathe it, is so much stronger and more expressive than the Lange that I can only leave this to a matter of personal taste. But while I love German watchmaking and I adore the caseback of this Lange, nevertheless, between the two, I have to choose the Omega, one of the hero watches of my childhood, because at the end of the day, you can't reason emotion. It's a feeling, and it's largely involuntary. I'm going back to my high school days when this was the ultimate hero watch, and timezone.com was still a bunch of fans out of Singapore. Guys, this is my winner. Tell me yours.